आज हम इस मुद्दे की गहराई में जाएंगे. We're stepping back in time to 1978, looking at a real-life crime case from India that honestly, even decades later, still sends shivers down the spine of anyone who hears about it. Welcome to This Explainer. Because of the heavy nature of what we're unpacking today, the Ranga-Billa Case, a tragedy that literally altered the fabric of Indian society, we're treating this timeline with the absolute utmost respect. We'll be using historical facts, police records, and looking at the societal aftermath to understand exactly what went down and, more importantly, why it absolutely still matters to every single one of us today. Okay, let's dive into this. There's a chilling warning that echoes directly from the historical texts of this case. अगर kidnapping को lightly लिया गया, तो consequences unimaginable हो सकते. Before 1978, the concept of a random, brutal kidnapping happening right in broad daylight to a perfectly ordinary family, it seemed like something out of a movie, right? Not reality. But the source material we're looking at today shows step by step how this calculated crime began, what the actual plan was, and how this specific abduction evolved into one of the most shocking crimes in India's history. This warning basically sets the stage for the whole shebang. Act 1, a normal day destroyed. To really wrap our heads around the weight of this tragedy, we have to look at the victims themselves. Geeta Chopra, who was just 16 years old, and her 14-year-old brother, Sanjeev. They came from a highly respectable family in Delhi. And looking at the records of their daily lives, it's just the absolute picture of normalcy. They went to school, they came home, they hung out with their friends. There were no dark shadows hanging over them, no known enemies, no crazy drama. It was just a perfectly regular, happy teenage existence. But tragically, an ordinary day in 1978 would become their last normal day. And this brilliantly illustrates how incredibly fast a peaceful reality can be completely shattered. Think about it. For years, the Chopra siblings lived this safe, predictable routine. August 25th was just a regular Friday. But then on Saturday, August 26, 1978, Geeta and Sanjeev stepped out near their home. According to the police reports, it was in this brief, totally mundane moment that two criminals intercepted them. Literally in the blink of an eye, the timeline shifts from everyday life to a terrifying abduction. Now you might be wondering, why them? Was this some sort of targeted attack against the Chopra family? Well, the historical sources make it crystal clear. No, this was not a personal vendetta. The motive was strictly ransom. The criminals just wanted money, and they made a cold, highly calculated decision to target these children to get it. Actually, the absolute randomness of the selection is exactly what terrified the public so much. Geeta and Sanjeev weren't chosen for who they were. They were picked simply because they were vulnerable targets of opportunity. It was purely 100% for financial gain. Act 2. The Kidnapping and Ransom. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is seeing exactly who was behind this and how they pulled it off. The perpetrators were Jasbir Singh, known as Ranga, and Kuljit Singh, known as Billa. Their method was chillingly simple but devastatingly effective. They used an everyday car to trap the children, essentially creating a mobile prison where they could easily overpower a teenage boy and girl. Once those doors closed, the siblings were entirely at the mercy of their captors, and for the Chopra family, a suffocating panic immediately set in. The clock was ticking. Shortly after the abduction, the criminals made contact with the family to demand the ransom money. Naturally, the family was frantic, the police were immediately informed, and the investigation kicked into high gear. But I want to pose this question directly to you. What happens when a ransom is demanded, but the criminals suddenly start to panic? Put yourself in the shoes of the investigators for a second. You've got these kidnappers who suddenly realize the authorities are closing in on them. What do you think their next move is? This is the exact moment this crime devolved from a ransom grab into a complete horror story. You see, in a normal kidnapping scenario, actually, scratch that, if there's even such a thing as normal here, the ransom gets paid and the victim is usually released because, well, the criminals got what they wanted. But the Ranga-Billa case, it went entirely off the rails. The criminals developed a severe, consuming fear that the police were actively tracking them down. So in their blind panic to avoid capture, they made a horrific decision. They didn't release the victims. Instead, to eliminate witnesses and erase evidence, they brutally murdered both children. Their sheer terror of the police directly led to the loss of two innocent lives. The absolute turning point of the investigation came when the bodies of Geeta and Sanjeev were finally recovered. Reading the historical accounts of this moment, it's just incredibly heavy. This tragic discovery sent a massive, devastating shockwave throughout all of Delhi. The unimaginable pain of the parents basically became a shared grief for the entire city. But right alongside that grief was an intense, palpable public anger. The innocence of these teenagers and the sheer brutality of the crime lit a massive fire under the public, demanding immediate justice. Act 3. The Resolution and Legacy. Let's move to and see how this builds. With the worst possible outcome now a reality, the desperate rescue mission turned into a highly aggressive hunt for the killers. The Delhi police made this their absolute top priority. They moved methodically, step by step, first meticulously collecting every shred of physical evidence, then recording statements from any possible witnesses who might have seen the abduction. And crucially, step 3, tracing that specific car. It was the physical link to the criminals. By combining all of this intelligence, they worked tirelessly to positively identify the suspects. Ultimately, that massive investigation zeroed in on the number two suspects, Ranga and Billa. Through their rigorous, non-stop detective work, the police tracked them both down and made the arrests. And let me tell you, the court proceedings that followed began under an immense, completely unprecedented level of public pressure. The whole country was watching this play out. They weren't just two criminals anymore. They were quite literally the faces of a nation's worst nightmare, and the public demanded that they be held fully accountable. When it finally came time for the trial, the evidence presented by the police was just overwhelmingly strong. Based on this indisputable proof, Ranga and Billa were officially declared guilty, and the court handed down the maximum penalty, the death sentence. Now, today, this historic verdict is still counted among the most famous in India's legal history. For the general public, it certainly provided a sense that justice had finally been delivered. But we really have to remember that while the legal system did its job perfectly here, a court's verdict could never, ever truly heal the permanent void left in the Chopra family. Lessons for the future. Our explainer doesn't just end in 1978, because this case fundamentally rewired the psychology of Indian parenting. A genuine nation's fear took hold. Almost overnight, parents across the country became extremely cautious. The fear of kidnapping spiked drastically. Before this, communities were generally a lot more open, a bit more trusting. But this event forced a really harsh realization onto society, the profound, very real danger of trusting unknown strangers. It was an absolute loss of innocence for an entire generation of parents, instilling a baseline level of safety awareness that absolutely persists in Indian culture to this very day. So the crucial point is, we are left with tangible, actionable safety takeaways, lessons that were unfortunately bought at a terrible price. Number 1, do not send kids out alone if it can be avoided. Number 2, actively teach them to avoid interactions with strangers. Number 3, safety awareness isn't something to teach later on. Teach it early, right from childhood. And finally, always keep an emergency contact system ready and ensure your children know exactly how to use it. These aren't just bullet points. They are the legacy of a tragedy designed to protect our families today. The Ranga-Billa case is not just a story about a kidnapping. It's a stark, brutal reminder that crime can destroy a world in a matter of seconds. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with a haunting thought that echoes whenever people remember this case. उन बच्चों की गलती सिर्फ इतनी थी कि वो wrong time पर wrong जगह थे. Think about that as you go about your day. Thank you so much for joining me to understand this historic case. Stay safe, stay aware, and I'll catch you in the next explainer.